I'm glad y'all are here tonight. Isn't it good that, in that song we sing about the characteristics of God, and then it says that is who you are, and it's who He is, whether we are obedient or disobedient. It doesn't change God's character. He's always faithful. He's always there for us. He's always working, even whenever we don't see it. And we're going to see a time when the Israelites in chapter 8 are going to be unfaithful, and they're going to wander away, and they're going to get outside of God's will. But that doesn't change who God is and His character. And even whenever we mess up and we wander, it doesn't change who He is. He's continually working. He is the way maker. He always has a plan, even whenever we're fighting against it. So chapter 8 is kind of a transition time in the history of Israel. Chapter 7, if you remember 4 and 5, the ark gets taken from them. It's in Philistine territory for 7 months, and then it gets brought back, and they end up, it gets brought back, and there's a big celebration, and then a couple of them look inside the ark, and God strikes down some of the Israelite men for looking inside the ark, and so they send the ark away. And it was about 20 years, and then chapter 7 comes up, and it says they lamented after the Lord. And Samuel commanded a few things of them at that point. First of all, he said, follow the Lord with all your heart, right? So this internal change. And then he commanded them to have an external change. So internal change, our heart change, and then put the idols away is what he tells them. The external change should be a reflection of what's going on in our hearts, the work that God's doing for us. And then the Philistines show up. So all the Israelites are gathered. They're not prepared for battle, and the Philistines show up. They're enemies. And it says they are afraid. And so what Samuel do? He takes the time to pray. He offers a burnt offering, a sacrifice. And then it says that the Lord thundered and brought confusion to the Philistines, and the Israelites just went out and slaughtered the Philistines. And then he sets up the stone called Ebenezer, and it says, till now the Lord has helped us, or thus far the Lord has helped us. And it was a stone to a reminder to the Israelites, this is what God did for us this day, so that they wouldn't forget. But now that we get to chapter 8, there's been 20 to 25 years passed between chapter 7 and chapter 8. So that's a good amount of time. And we're going to see the Israelites seem to have forgotten what God did for them. And we're going to get a transition here. Israel has never had a king up to this point. They've had priests, they've had prophets, and they've had judges. And Samuel was a judge. God set the judge up over them for a time being to accomplish what he needed accomplished. And they've never had a king. So we're going to go from a judgeship to a kingship here because the Israelites are going to demand it. In chapters 8 through 12, we get Saul's kingship. And then 13 through 15, we see the downfall of Saul. Okay, in chapter 8, it's the beginning of this when Israel asked for a king. So they had depended upon God and his grace, his mercy up until this point for their entire existence. And now they're saying, no, we want a king. And why did they want a king? So they don't want to have to wait for a judge. They don't want to have to wait for God to appoint somebody. We want a king. And so what's a king do? A king rules for his entire life, and then it just passes down his lineage to his son. So they're saying we don't ever want to have to guess who's going to rule over us or be without a ruler. And so we're going to see that Samuel's sons don't follow the Lord. And so that's probably part of the reason why they're unsure. Samuel's up in years now. Who's gonna follow him? Who's gonna lead us? Not only that, they're probably feeling pressure from their enemies, the Philistines. I mean, they're still there. They're still very present threat. But there's a key line in chapter 8, and it says, we want to be like all the nations. That's the important phrase here in chapter 8, like all the nations. God set Israel apart. They were supposed to be different, and they say, we don't want to be different. We want to be like everybody else. And that's the key reason why they're asking for a king. Everyone around them has a king. They have a ruler over them. They're saying, we want to be like that. Why can't we be like everybody else? So instead of following God's way for them, they wanted to follow the ways of the world. It seemed like it would be easier, maybe better, having somebody to look to that they can see instead of having to go to God, offer a sacrifice, ask God to speak to them, ask God to appoint a judge over them. Because at this time, there was no head leader over Israel. There was Samuel, who was the judge, but he wasn't, as far as government goes, he was not in charge of Israel. They were more of a loose confederation of tribes here, and each tribe was responsible for seeking the Lord's will and then following it. That's what united Israel, and they're going to want to change. So let's read 1 Samuel 8, verses 1 through 9. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations." But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." And Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, "Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them, according to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." Okay, so Samuel's up in years, okay, and he is starting to make preparations for what happens whenever he passes. And so he sets his sons up as judges. Samuel's one of the godliest men we find in the Bible. But it's very interesting that he set his sons up as judges over Israel. That's not how it worked. God raised up the judges. It did not pass down to their sons like that. It was up to God to raise up a judge. So he says, hey, my sons are going to be the judges of Israel. That's not the way it was supposed to work. And so the elders kind of get wind of this. Okay? Even if you remember in Judges 8, when Gideon has the big military victory, right? The Israelites come to Gideon, who was a judge, and they say, "We want you to rule over us, and then your son, and then your grandkids." And Gideon pushes back, and he says, "No, that's not the way it works." So Judges 8, verses 22 and 23, the Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." That's getting to the heart of the judges. That's who they were. They weren't the person that wanted to be in charge of everything. They were the people who just wanted to do God's will. And he says, the Lord will rule over you. He had the opportunity to lead the nation. And he says, no, that's not why I'm here. It's kind of leaning towards them making him a king. And he says, no. That would have been a powerful play for him. He says, why? Because the Lord will rule over you. But even in that, you saved us from the Midianites. Gideon didn't save them from the Midianites. God saved him. It was God who appointed Gideon. And then what happens? He has all these thousands of soldiers, and God says, ask him who's afraid. So he asks them who's afraid. 22,000 of them go home. He still has 10,000 soldiers. God says that's still too many. So he says, go to the brook and watch how they drink. He sends another 9,000 plus home, and Gideon ends up with 300 soldiers, and he goes and wins the battle. Why? Because the Lord was with him. It was God who gave Gideon the victory, and yet people forget that so quickly. And so Samuel here is not right to appoint his sons as judges over Israel. And then you got to wonder, why would he do that whenever he's judged Israel for years and years, and he's no doubt called out sins in people, and yet he knows his sons are sinful, and he appoints them anyway. You have to wonder why he would do that. Was he just excusing their sins? Probably some of the same sins that he would have called out in other people, and yet he's going to set his sons up. Verse 2 says, or verse 3, his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. It's pretty similar to Eli. So if you remember earlier in 1 Samuel, Eli raises Samuel. But what if Eli's own sons didn't follow his ways? Chapter 2, verse 12. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. Verse 17. Thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. It's the same situation. They're turning aside. They're taking something that should be God's work, and they're turning it into gain. They're robbing the people. And so, but he ends up setting them up anyway. And Beersheba, where his sons were at, seemed to be a pretty prominent town. So they're in a prominent position. They're not in some small town where nobody knows their name. And their reputation has gotten around to all the nation of Israel, so that all of the leaders in Israel know that these aren't guys who follow the Lord. And so Samuel would have had to know that. And yet he does it anyway. And he goes ahead and sets them up. So verse 4, the elders come together. The elders were leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. These were prominent men in each tribe who people would have looked to for leadership. And they come to Samuel and they say, your sons don't follow your ways. We don't want them to rule over us. This was a wise decision by them to not allow that to happen. But then they make a bad decision. Instead, appoint a king over us. The problem with that is that wasn't God's plan. Think of who brought Israel to where they were now. God brought them out of Egypt. God led them away from Pharaoh. God brought them through the Red Sea. God provided for them as they wandered in the wilderness. God went before them whenever they were conquering the Canaanites. Think about if they'd have just thought back to marching around Jericho, who brought the walls down? It was God. And yet instead of continuing to look to God, they say, hey, we want somebody we can see. We want to look like everybody else. The Philistines over here, they have a king. They have someone that they can look to that's going to lead them in battle, that's going to run the government. The other Canaanites around, they have somebody in charge. Why don't we have somebody in charge? Why are we different? And the elders come, and it says they all asked Samuel for this. There's some sort of unity here, and they're all asking for the same thing. Appoint a king who will judge us like the nations. The request in itself wasn't wrong. The request for a king wasn't wrong. Their timing was wrong, and the reasoning behind it was wrong. God had allowed in Deuteronomy for a king. Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 20. I want to read this. Moses is preparing the nation, and he reads this, some laws concerning kings. So Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 20. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as a king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excess of silver and gold. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law approved by the Levitical priests. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. Moses knew some 400 years before we get to 1 Samuel that there's going to be a king in Israel. The problem was their reasoning for it is that they didn't want to trust God to lead them, and the timing was wrong. God was not ready to set a king over them, but they're going to demand it anyway. And he even lines out some of the things they're going to face. He says, must not acquire many horses for himself. Don't lead him back to Egypt. Don't let him acquire many wives for himself. If you know anything about David, had many wives. Solomon had even more. Like, he is warning them of some of the things that they're going to do wrong. And Samuel is going to warn the people here in a second, like, hey, whenever you set this king up over you, it's going to cost you. You are following the Lord and his ways, and you are receiving blessings. Okay? But even way back in Genesis, Abraham and Sarah and then Jacob were promised that they would have kings as their descendants. Jacob named Judah the kingly tribe. So this was coming. This was going to be in God's plan. It just wasn't right now. The reasoning they're asking for this is wrong. They said, we want to be like everybody else. Israel was set apart as God's nation. God's purpose for Israel was to be different, to be even his people in a superior way where people would look to Israel and be pointed to God. Exodus 19:5-6. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my commandment, then out of all nations, you will be my treasured possession. You, Israel, you are my treasured possession if you will keep my commandments. And they're not going to do that right now. They've asked for a king before. They asked Gideon to rule over them. In Judges 9, Abimelech, one of Gideon's sons, tries to set himself up as king. In fact, he kills his 70 brothers to do so. The problem is, whenever we try to rush ahead of God, whenever we don't wait on him, or really we just try to force his hand or get out of a situation, do it our way, we get in trouble. Israel was set aside to be God's chosen people, and yet what are they doing? They're saying, we want to be like everybody else. It's a real struggle to want to be like everybody else. Sometimes what they have looks really nice, or it looks like they have a really good life, or man, I'm suffering, I'm trying to follow God, these people over here don't follow God, and it just looks good sometimes. It's tempting to go, maybe I'll just try that way. But that's not the plan God has for us. Like, as a believer, now God has set us apart as his chosen people, right? And he has a plan for us to be different from the world, so that when the world looks at us, they see him. That's the point, to bring glory to him, even when life is difficult, when we don't know why. Like, Israel is sitting here and they're going, who's going to lead us? We have enemies around us. What's going to happen to us? The point was, be set apart so that when other nations see you, they're pointing to Christ. They're pointing to God. Same thing for us. When things are hard and we're not sure what's going to happen, we need to stay inside God's will, not rush it, so when people look at us, they see God, right? They're pointing to him. That's how, when in the New Testament, it talks about being a light, right? We're to shine a light. We're not to try to run into something else just because of the unknown. We serve a God who knows everything. So even whenever we have some unknowns, like, we can have a peace and a trust in him. Romans 12:1-2 says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Do not be conformed to the world. Don't chase after the world. Instead, be conformed into the image of Christ. 1 Peter 2:9, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. That's to us. That's to believers. You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. It says we are God's special possession. Like, we are to stay in God's will and his timing, not try to get outside of it. But that takes trust, takes patience. It takes us spending time with him, because the more time we spend with him, the less likely we are to try to push back. Okay? We need to be spending time with him. And so whenever we're looking at Israel, they're asking for a king. Why is this a big deal? What's the difference between a judge and a king? Really, they're asking for a complete change in government, and they're not doing it with any initiative from God. They're not seeking God in this. In chapter 7, their enemies showed up, and what'd they do? They asked Samuel, will you pray for us? Will you intercede for us? In chapter 8, they show up. They don't ask Samuel to pray at all. They go, this is what we want. Now do this for us. They don't seek God at all. They should have taken some time. Why not just bring it to God? Like, bring your heart to him. Hey, Samuel, you're elderly. We don't know how much more time you're going to be able to judge over us. Your sons don't follow your way, and we're worried about the nation of Israel. We don't know what's coming next. Will you intercede to the Lord for us? to give us guidance as to what the next step is, to give us a next leader. But instead, they don't do that. They just go, this is what we want, and we're gonna run with it. A judge was for a specific time, a specific purpose. God raised up the judge, not the people. He didn't rule over Israel like a king. A judge wasn't a form of government per se. When they're asking for a king, they're asking for a form of government, a single person to rule over the nation. And when they get a king, he's going to establish a government. But the heart of the judges was, I don't want to be king. I don't want to be that person. I just want to be here to do the work God has for me. And in verses 6 through 9, it says that Samuel was like grieved over them asking this. He may have been a little hurt, like, you don't want my sons to rule over you? Like, why not? But in reality, it's like he understands you are rejecting God as your leader. You're rejecting God as your king. All these other nations have kings who they view as a God, but you have the true God as your king. Why are you rejecting him? There's an ungodly motive here, and they don't cover it in prayer. There's a quote I came across when I was preparing. It says, surely it is the mistake of our life that we carry our burdens instead of handing them over, that we worry instead of trusting, that we pray so little. What if they were to just bring it to God, say they're worried about it? I think of Hannah, whenever she has the anguish, says she had anguish in her heart, and she just came and poured her heart out to God. And before she even had an answer, it said her face brightened because she had just handed it over to God before she even had an answer. It's the same thing for us. Just don't be afraid to take it and say, hey, this is what it is. This is how I'm feeling, and just lay it out there for them. If the nation of Israel had done that, they probably would have made a different decision. And so they're going to put, the reason they weren't ready for a king is because the trust that they were supposed to put in God, God knew that they would put that trust in a king. Chapter 7, Samuel said, get rid of the idols. They're going to take a human king and they're going to place him on the same level as God, and that makes him an idol. And so they're going to take this king, put him up, and they're saying, hey, we don't like the way God's leading us right now. We don't like what he's doing, so we want to do it a different way. And in verse 8, they're forsaking God. This isn't the first time. If you remember Mount Sinai, Moses goes up, and what do they say? They say, Aaron, here's all our gold, melt it, and make a God for us. Whenever they were wandering in the wilderness, Numbers 14, they say, hey, let us make a captain for ourselves. Let us make a leader, a king, and then let's go back to Egypt, right? That wasn't God's plan. He had told them never to go back, right? But they say, hey, things are rough right now. Let's do it our way. Okay? Why would they want a king? A king is going to make them feel secure. Being able to look and say, that's our guy. That would make them feel secure. It's interesting that they're going to reject God as their king here. And then in John 19, whenever they're about to crucify Jesus, they bring Jesus out and he says, here is your king. And the Jews again reject him. They say, we have no king but Caesar. So in the Old Testament, they're rejecting God as king. In the New Testament, they rejected God the Son as their king as well. And so he's getting ready in verse 9. God says, hey, Samuel, it's okay. Give them what they want, but you need to warn them first. And he's warning them so that they can't come back and be like, God, if I'd have known how this was going to work out, I probably would have done it differently. He's going to tell them up front, this is how it's going to work out for you. It's not going to be great. But he kind of gives them this accountability. Don't come back to me and tell you I didn't tell you. You're going to understand what this is going to bring with us. So let's read 9 through 18 in 1 Samuel chapter 8. Or let's read 10 through 18. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and the vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. To wrap that up, he's saying, you, all your possessions, your sons and daughters are subject to the king. Whatever he requires of you, you're going to have to give him. And it's going to be your best. A king isn't satisfied with seconds. He's not satisfied with leftovers. He wants the best. What's really interesting is, who is the best supposed to go to? It's supposed to go to God. And the king's going to require their best. And then he says he's going to require a tenth. In the Old Testament, many times they would bring a tenth to God. He's going to require, God is telling him, he is going to put himself in my place. He's going to take things that you don't want taken from you. He's going to take things that are really mine because he's elevating himself. And some of these things come about. He's saying you're going to lose freedoms. You're going to lose your possessions. The best things that you would either give to me, the king is going to require those of you. Your sons are going to run before his chariots. 2 kings, at least, in 2 Samuel chapter 15 and 1 Kings chapter 1, would have a chariot with horses and horsemen and 50 men who would run before their chariot. Like, this is literally coming true. Your sons will run before the king's chariot. Why? I don't know. Maybe it was like a status symbol that they would have these men running before their chariots. But some of the Israelites, that will be their job. You're going to run before the king's chariot. And then he's saying they're going to be permanent officers in the king's army. You're asking for a king to fight your battles. What does a king need? He needs a standing army. He needs officers. So your sons are going to serve him. They're going to fight the king's battles. They're going to be officers in his army. They're going to be foot soldiers in his army. Your daughters are going to serve the king. They're going to work for the king. An army needs supplies. He's going to take everything he needs. He's going to take the best of your fields. He's going to go beyond what it really requires to sustain his government. He's going to take and take and take. In chapter 22, Saul is chasing David, and Saul kind of gets mad at some of his officers, and he reminds them. He says, think of all the possessions and land I've given you. Where did he get that land and those possessions? He had taken them from the people of Israel and given them to his officers. And he says, you remember that? You think David's going to give you that? Saul had taken things from the people of Israel and given them to his officers. And it says, the Israelites, all their possessions, you will be subject to the king's use. This came especially under Solomon. There came a time when the Israelites cried out for relief from the heavy burden that Solomon put on them to keep the splendor of his kingdom. That's 1 Kings chapter 5, 1 Kings chapter 4, and chapter 12. They cry out because Solomon had such a heavy burden on the people because he wanted to keep his splendor of his kingdom. And then it says, and when you get tired of it and you cry out because of this king, God won't answer you. There's a consequence for the decision you're making, and when you get tired of it, God's not going to take the consequence away. Let's finish up verse 19. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey their voice and make them a king. Samuel then said to the men of Israel, go every man to his city. That's the key verse right there in 20. That we may also be like all the nations. That was everything they wanted. We want to be like everybody else. And if they had just stayed in God's will, they would have realized God set them apart for a reason. God has something specific for them. Now, the good thing is we serve a sovereign God who's still in control, and he's still going to work good out not only for Israel, but for the world through this, because he's going to give them their king. He's going to give them Saul as their king, but then he's going to work his king, who is David, into the mix, because God is a good God and he's always working, right? He's always bringing about his plan. But they asked for this king to make them feel secure. And whenever we get to chapter 9, it describes Saul. And it says he's a good-looking guy. No one in Israel was as handsome as him. And he stood a head taller than everyone else. So Saul would have stood out from a crowd. He was the guy the Israelites were looking for. That's our guy. That's our king. That's who can lead us. That's who we want. So God gives them what they want. Here, this is what you want. I'm going to give you the guy who looks like a king. The problem is Saul is going to fail. Saul's heart was not after the Lord. So you have Saul, tall guy, stands out of the crowd, good-looking, handsome guy. Israel saying, that's what we want. We can see him. We can look to him. He can lead us in battle. Like he's intimidating. He looks like a warrior. Think of when God sends Samuel to appoint David. Nobody's looking to David like a warrior. Nobody's looking to him to lead the nation. His own dad forgets to call him out of the field. Samuel says, bring all your sons. And Samuel goes through all his sons, and he goes, he's not here. Do you have any more? And Jesse, David's dad's like, oh, yeah, David, he's out in the field. I forgot about him. Why? He didn't pass the eye test. David wasn't a guy you would notice when he comes in the door. It says he was handsome. He was like rugged looking, but nobody was thinking of David. And then what's it say? Man looks at the outward appearance. The Lord looks at the heart. And God gives in to Israel. And it's like, why? Like, couldn't you just like manhandle them, strong hand them, and make them follow your will? But he doesn't. He lets them have their way. Right? And so they reject his rule. I think of Jonah. Remember, Jonah gets sent to Nineveh, and Jonah's like, I'm not going to Nineveh. And so he gets on the boat, and what happens? The guys end up throwing him overboard, and a big fish comes and swallows him and spits him out. Like, guess what, Jonah? You're going to go to Nineveh. Hey, we can reject God as ruler, but God never steps off his throne. So they're saying, give us a king, give us what we want. And who is going to appoint the king? God appoints the king through Samuel. So God's still in control. He's going, I'll give you exactly who you want, because it's going to work out to where I can give you who I want, where I can come around to David. Why? Because who do we get the Messiah through? David, right? So he's a good God, and he's always working out. Like, he is going to work this out. So why does he give in to them? Because he is going to take their sinfulness, right? They're stepping out of his will, and he's still going to work good through it. Even whenever they're under Saul's leadership, he still blesses the nation of Israel. Like, he gives them victories in that. But then he ultimately blesses them by bringing David about to the throne. And then it's through his lineage that we get the Messiah. So he's always at work. But we would make it a lot easier on ourselves if we would just stay inside his will. If we would just seek him in those big moments, small moments too, decision-making moments. If we would just take the time to slow down like Israel did in chapter 7 and not rush into it like they do in chapter 8. And we would find that maybe we can stay in line with him, because there are blessings that come with being in line with him. Even if it's the blessing of just having the peace of knowing that we're following the Lord. Let's pray. God, thank you for tonight. God, that we can learn from your word. We can learn from Samuel. We can learn from the Israelites. God, thank you that even whenever we make mistakes, God, when we run ahead of you, when we get outside of your will, God, you're a good God. You're a forgiving God. You always take us back. God, that you're always working out for good for your plan. God, I pray that we would slow down, that we would stay inside your will, that we would seek you. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.